Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar. This webinar is titled Clear as Plastic. And really the intention is just that there have been so many plastics headlines in the last few years, but I feel like just each year there are more. And I just wanted to provide some time at the end of Plastic Free July for us to really talk through those things and really kind of feel like we understand what they're talking about and that we're not just having to be reactive to headlines that are maybe not telling the whole story, or maybe not telling an accurate story, or maybe they are, and we want to learn more. So this is webinar style, so your camera is off, your microphone is off. I was hoping to interact in the chat, but it's not working, I guess, for you guys, but we do have a Q&A box, and I would love for you to use that. So really, I'm just going to talk for like maybe 30 to maybe 40 minutes just with my slides. And then the rest of the time is just for questions. Like I'm just here as long as you guys are. I blocked off an hour and a half just because that's kind of the standard length for webinars that I usually do, but I think we will be off before 7:30. Again, I'm just here to chat with you guys about your questions about plastics. This is being recorded and I will share the slides after. And if you've been to one of my webinars, you know that I always send a very detailed follow-up email with kind of everything that I talk about, my resources where I got my information, and the again, the slides, the recordings, the Q&A. If there were questions that I couldn't answer, I usually try to answer those and then send that out. So just don't worry about kind of writing down things as we go unless you are an active note taker. All of this will be shared. And again, I don't think it should take an hour and a half, but I'm just here to chat with you guys about plastics for as long as you'd like. So tonight's topics. Oh, I'm Rosie Briggs, by the way. I am on my way out of my previous role at EcoCycle. I have been the engagement and public education manager for years, and I have since moved to Vermont. And so I've been very lucky to pass my baton to Lex Shannon, who will be joining us in a little bit when she's done with a workshop that we're running. And she is going to be so great. She's already so great. So if you haven't met her, I hope you meet Lex soon. But that's who I am. I won't be the person that you'll maybe deal with moving forward, but I certainly will still answer questions and emails and, know so many of you. So EcoCycle, also, if you're not familiar with EcoCycle, we are one of the oldest and largest nonprofit recyclers in the US. We started back in 1976 as a grassroots movement. We currently operate the Boulder County Recycling Center in partnership with the county of Boulder County, as well as the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, the CHARM, along with the city of Boulder. And beyond that, we do so many things in terms of education and advocacy and infrastructure and legislation. And we'll talk a lot about that tonight. But we're a mission-based nonprofit, and we also have experience as an actual recycler, about 50 years of it. So that's kind of the perspective of this presentation. I am by no means a leading expert in plastics. I've just talked a lot about it in the past several years with you all. And so I'm sure there'll be questions that I can't answer, and I'm sure, maybe I'll get things wrong, but I am a huge nerd about plastics, and I think you have to be just because there's so many things to know. So tonight we're going to talk about kind of three main headlines. The first has been a headline for many years now, almost 7. And that's, what's the deal with China? Did China stop taking all of our plastics? Did they stop taking our recycling? What's going on there? The second is some headlines that I've seen 9% and I've seen 5%, but there were some headlines that came out in the last few years that were about only 9% of our stuff is getting recycled. So we'll talk about that. The third is having to do with some lawsuits that you might have seen specifically in the past year about, did the industry, meaning the plastics industry, the oil and gas industry, know kind of the damage, the extent of the damage that this single-use plastic crisis would have, and also about the feasibility of recycling's role in that solution. So we'll talk about that as well. And then I wanted to leave on a positive and empowered note. So we're just going to talk a little bit about plastic-free July stuff to help you reduce your plastic intake if that wasn't something you were already doing this month. There's no need to do it only in July. We can do it whenever. And so for this, we have a very tangible workbook for you. So I'm only going to spend a little bit of time on these steps to reduce because I am going to then send you this comprehensive workbook that we have that really walks you through the process. And it's just as much as you want to engage, as much or as little as you want to take on. And then, like I said, we'll have plenty of time for questions. You have the Q&A box. So just as I'm talking, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. Since I'm presenting my screen, I won't respond to them yet, but once we get to the Q&A portion, we can go through all of that. And I believe, again, not quite sure about the settings, but I believe that you should be able to upvote questions that you want to kind of be prioritized if you also had that question. Let's get into it. So plastics have been making headlines recently. These were literally just like the first few that I could find. There were so many just from my Ecosia search. There are so many different versions of all of these too, in terms of the article itself and the headline. And it's overwhelming. It makes it hard to know what's going on and hard to know how to engage in solutions. So let's just talk very briefly about some issues with plastics and why are we talking about plastic as its own category of materials? So the first is that plastics tend to be unjust in their impact. Petrochemical production and plastic pollution disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of color. According to a 2024 report from the Environmental Integrity Project, in the US, 2/3 of the people living within 3 miles of the factories that manufacture the main ingredients in plastic products are people of color. And at the end of its life cycle, much of the plastic waste generated in high-income countries end up in low-income countries not equipped to safely handle it. The other thing about plastic is that it is forever. All of the plastics ever made exist somewhere on the planet. And I bet if that was a concept unfamiliar to you, when you heard that, I bet you would think, wow, we better be pretty careful about what we make out of this material, right? You would think there are many important things that we do with plastic. There's things that plastic has allowed us to do that we weren't able to do with other materials. But that is a very small percentage of the amount of plastic that is on this earth. And because of its impact, we really have to be wiser with the production of plastics. Plastic never fully biodegrades, just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastics called microplastics. Scientists have found microplastics everywhere in our rivers, our drinking water, the soil that grows our food, and our bodies. That's another headline that you might have seen in the past year specifically. Is finding microplastics in specifically reproductive organs in humans. They've even found microplastics in Arctic snow, where plastic has never physically been, meaning microplastics have infiltrated the global water cycle. So we won't spend too much time on, we all know kind of the issues, but just there's a lot of reasons that makes plastic necessary to kind of tease apart and talk about on its own. So especially in the context of the other materials that we talk about in the recycling stream. So we have plastic, and that gets a lot of attention. But we also have aluminum, steel, cardboard, glass. We have all of these other players, all of these other materials that have their own industries. And we have to talk about plastic as its own category for several reasons. One of those reasons is plastic is just a low quality material. It's just not very good at being turned back into what it already was over and over. Now it can certainly go what we call bottle to bottle, meaning let's say it's a bottle, it can get turned back into a bottle. But there are many reasons why that doesn't tend to happen, and we're about to talk about those now. But also just physically, it's just not good at retaining its physical integrity. And so only a fraction of plastics are recyclable. And like we said, like it's low quality, breaks down, but it sticks around. It's not that it's disappearing after it breaks down. There's also few buyers and a lack of producer responsibility when it comes to plastics. The plastics industry, as a rule, does not buy back enough of their own product. On average, plastic beverage containers are made from less than 10% recycled content. So while we see the industries of other materials kind of buying back their own product because their choice is that or making it out of virgin materials, with plastic, we see less of that. And part of that is the next bullet point, which is insufficient market value. So in the plastics industry, they have subsidies, and those subsidies make virgin plastics cheaper to produce than buying back their own recycled content to make new products. And so the market value of recycled plastics for a recycler like EcoCycle does not cover the costs of collection and processing. It's not a lucrative material. And speaking of costs and collection, it's expensive to do that. So much of the contamination in the recycling stream is plastic. That's a huge problem. But also the plastic that is recyclable is hard to sort. When we talk about something like steel, we can just get it with a magnet. Everything is mixed in a typical single stream materials recovery facility, which is just a recycling center. And we have to figure out ways to sort one thing from the next. So with something like steel, again, we can just kind of pass it under a magnet and get it out with a magnet. And of course, that's a very simple example of, that's a good example of a material that's easy to sort. But when it comes to plastics, there's constantly new packaging with different resin types and shapes and sizes and colors and chemical additives. And it's hard to know how to sort it. It's hard to know how to sort those things from each other. It's hard to know how markets will react, whether they'll even buy them. These things are costly and complicated to collect and sort. And like we said, it's not that the plastics are paying their way, so to speak, because they're not valuable in those markets because the producers are not buying them back at the rate that they would need to. There's also a lot of misleading labeling and greenwashing that goes with plastics. So the chasing arrows recycling symbol here, the green one, appears on almost all plastics, regardless of whether they are recyclable or not. And often they are not. Like we said, only a small fraction of plastics are recyclable. And most things that are plastic that you pick up will have a recycling symbol on it. This misleads consumers to believe they're recyclable. It leads to more contamination. It makes things harder for recyclers and for consumers who are trying to do the right thing. There's also bad design. Plastic packaging contains toxic additives, dyes, labels, and other contaminants. And like we said, because the producers are not typically acting as also the buyers, there's not this built-in incentive to design it for recyclability or label it as such. So because they're not necessarily seeing it again, they're not necessarily buying it back, they don't really care if it's built to come back to them, if it's built to be recycled, if it's labeled to make sure it's collected again. They really, and we'll talk much more about this, are interested in making you think it's recyclable, which is, of course, greenwashing. And again, we'll talk much more about why they do that and how they've been successful in doing that. And so this list is not exhaustive, and it's not to say that some of these don't apply to other materials in some way. But really, these are the reasons that we have to talk about plastic by itself. We can't really group it in with the other materials when we're talking about these, sorting and marketing and funding issues, because it's kind of its own beast for many reasons. So let's talk about the headlines now. The first one that I'll talk about is kind of the oldest one, the one that's kind of been in the headlines for the longest. So the Chinese National Sword Policy, it's also known as the Green Fence Policy, you might have heard. It was announced in 2017 and it was implemented in 2018. And essentially what happened is, because of all of the last slides points that I just went into, there's just simply too much plastic. China was like, we cannot, there's just too much to turn into new things. There's, again, because it's not going in this circular pattern that we want it to, we're just ending up with too much output and we can't put it all back into the system. And it was too contaminated. So people tend to think that this was kind of a policy where the Chinese government said no more American recycling. And it was really just a severe tightening of contamination standards. They were just like, okay, you can send us your stuff if you can meet this like 5% contamination standard, which American recyclers couldn't. And so part of that is, there's a lot of investment that needs to go into creating a really clean stream. And a lot of that just wasn't happening. And in part because we had these other avenues, like sending it to China. When I say we, I don't mean EcoCycle. EcoCycle, again, is very unique in being a mission-based nonprofit recycler. A lot of recyclers are big corporations. A lot of them own landfills also. They just have different models and different motivations and priorities than someone like EcoCycle. EcoCycle is also part of an alliance of mission-based recyclers. It's called AMBER, the Alliance for Mission-Based Recycling. And it's us and 3 other organizations in the US. And when this happened, it actually provided a huge opportunity. So certainly in any US recycling market, like as a whole, whether you were sending stuff to China or not, there were huge waves, there were huge ripples. We all felt the effects of this policy. But for someone like EcoCycle or our Amber Fellows, we were already investing in things like educating our community so that they give us the things that we can genuinely sell in recycling markets. Things like investing in sorting, whether that means people who are actually sorting the facility or technology. Like we'll talk a little bit about the lasers that we use to sort plastics. And investing in making relationships with and establishing and building infrastructure around local markets so that we don't have to throw something across the ocean. And so if you've heard me talk about plastics before, actually, if you've heard me talk about plastics before, you've honestly probably heard me say essentially everything that I will say in this webinar. But I hope that it's a good review for everybody, just because again, there's so much to know. It doesn't hurt to hear it in a few different ways. But the kind of narrative that I use to explain this is like, when you're a kid and you just have a messy room, you got a bunch of toys that are mostly plastic, and every time your parent comes in and tells you to clean your room, you're like, I'll just put it under the bed and they'll think that I'm cleaning my room. And essentially, again, this is very simplified, but in the case of this national sword policy, China basically lifted up our bed and we were forced to look at the pile that we had created. These things that we had not genuinely been taking care of in the way that we were supposed to, basically. Not that recyclers who were sending things to China were breaking a law or anything like that, but just like, that's not really recycling. That's not really what we were doing, just sending whatever we want to a different country. We need to get to the root of these solutions. And so, like I said, this looking at a pile of the stuff that you've accumulated is a great opportunity to actually get to the root of that issue. And that's what happened. Since this policy, we have passed so much legislation that, I'm speaking for our policy team here, but I didn't think that we would be able to pass all of the things that we've passed in the time that we've been able to pass it. We've had landmark statewide bills since this happened, and it's all getting to the root of the issues. So for example, when we lifted up the bed, so to speak, there was a huge pile of polystyrene. Polystyrene, the foamy, squeaky, horrible plastic that we all know and hate. This was a great example for us to be like, oh, why is there so much polystyrene here? There must be a better way to deal with this. Obviously, there's not good recycling markets if it's piling up here. We need to look upstream. We need to get to the root of this issue. And sure enough, recently we passed the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act in the state of Colorado, which effectively bans polystyrene packaging, food packaging. So again, who's to say whether that would have happened or on which time scale without this policy? But I do want to kind of look at it in a positive light. We were able to, get to upstream solutions faster and producer responsibility solutions faster when kind of faced with our own mess as a nation. So again, EcoCycle was never, if you're in Boulder County, EcoCycle was never sending stuff to China, and your local recycler, if you don't live in Boulder County, might not have either, but in any case, we're all tied to the same kind of industry. And we all needed to pivot and figure out how to do better. So the next headline that I want to talk about is how much gets recycled. I have gotten this question specifically from this series of headlines, probably more than any other in the past few years. And so there were just a flurry of headlines as a result of this. So it's this study is what kind of caused or what sparked all of these headlines. I saw everything from like everything you recycle, only 5% is getting recycled, or only 9% of plastics are getting recycled. There was a range of kind of the percentage and a range of like what it was saying. And a lot of people came to me concerned because they interpreted that as being only 9% or even 5%, whatever they read, of everything that I put in the recycling bin is getting thrown out. And I said, oh, no. We need to talk about what this study actually said. So again, I'll send out this, this research article that these headlines are from. But let's talk about what it's saying. So the 9% statistic, it's 9 in the study, not 5. The 9% statistic is referring to all plastics, not all recyclable materials. So it's only talking about plastics. And it's not just talking about the plastics that you try to recycle, the plastics that you put in your recycling bin. It's talking about all plastics ever created. So again, we've been making plastics in mass since, post World War II. It's been a long time. There's a lot of plastics out there, and only a tiny little bit of it is recyclable. It's not that you're failing as people, it's not that you're failing to recycle. It's not that recyclers are failing to get it to market and actually turn it into new stuff. It's that out of all of the plastic crap out there, only about 9% of it is recyclable at all, is feasibly recyclable. So like just sitting in your house or your room, wherever you are, your car, whatever, I bet you can look around and find at least 10 plastic items just off the bat. And I bet only about one of those things is recyclable. There's just plastic everywhere. There's plastic. There's cat toys all around me. They're all plastic. None of that is recyclable. Only a sliver is recyclable. It's not you, it's not us. It's that there's too much plastic, and it's, like we said, not being designed to be recyclable. Again, the article does not address materials like glass, aluminum, cardboard, steel, all the other really good, valuable stuff that we have, that we see in the recycling stream, and that we do recycle over and over and over. Plastics actually, they disproportionately make up contamination in recycling centers, but they actually, in terms of everything that gets recycled, they're just a little bit. I can confirm this and send out the real statistic if it's not this, or either way in the follow-up email. But last I checked, at the Boulder County Recycling Center, only about 10% of our stuff that comes out of the recycling center is plastics. And again, that's not because we're not recycling the plastics you give us. It's just because a lot of it is non-recyclable plastic. It's just contamination. And most of what we get, as we should, are things like cardboard, aluminum, steel, glass, cartons, all of that stuff. And so, I heard from some folks that their neighbors or even them were just deciding not to recycle at all because now they have trust issues about like only a small percent of what I'm recycling is getting recycled. And that's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like, because we're reading this headline about plastics and its failings, we're then throwing out very valuable materials like glass, steel, aluminum, all of those things. If you are giving us recyclable plastic, it is getting recycled. Again, I can speak for EcoCycle, for the Boulder County Recycling Center. And, since the National Sword, again, most recyclers are now doing better with their plastics. So please continue recycling the recyclable plastic that you have. It's still better than throwing it out. There's still definitely environmental benefits of recycling plastic, but the best thing to do is reduce them in the first place whenever we can. The next headline is about whether the industry knew its impact, whether the industry tried to help, whether they were knowingly misleading the public in terms of the recyclability of plastic and the role of recycling in solving this crisis that they created. So spoiler alert, they did know. And There's a great story about this on NPR that I will forward also. And again, if you've heard me talk about plastics or consumerism or anything, you've probably heard me talk about World War II, just because it's hard for us to talk about how we got here without going back to World War II. So I will, as briefly as I can, go take us back in time. During World War II, we as community members, we as people, as individuals, as consumers, were necessarily conservation minded. We were good at conserving natural resources, at reusing things, at repairing things. We were good at it because as people, we are good at that. One of my main takeaways is for you to not feel like humans are the problem, for you to not feel like it's human nature and that we're doomed, because we're not. And we'll talk about how we got here, but essentially, as World War II was coming to an end, there was this big top-down push, an industry push to increase consumerism, because you're not going to make money if all of the consumers are, buying something and then keeping it in their homes for their whole lives and then passing it on to their grandchildren and repairing it if it breaks. And that's, you're not going to, make profits. And so there was this big push to get products through homes rather than into them. And so plastic, and actually the single-use culture itself, was specifically and tirelessly marketed. And they kind of sold this as a culture, almost a product, but it wasn't like a service that came about in response to people needing access to it. It was a marketing scheme. It was, I will say, propaganda. Like, we'll see some examples of this. So again, people knew how to reuse, they knew how to conserve. We had to be taught to throw resources and packaging away because it's not in our nature. So, the example here is not even advertising a specific product. It's literally teaching you how to throw packaging away because it's in our nature to conserve. On the left, they're like, look at this stupid woman. She's carrying around these natural resources and she's going to return them for a deposit. No, be like this cool mom over here who just dumps it all in the trash and doesn't care. Like, it's, they've underlined throwaway. They even have her in a cooler outfit on the right. They're teaching you how to throw stuff away. We have to be taught because we don't want to be throwing stuff away. We're over here clinging to the glass because we know it's valuable. There was also a lot of really playing on patriotism at this time. Again, it was right after the war. And there was resistance not only to throwing stuff away, but to plastic itself. And so when that resistance was felt, they really matched it with like this, no, plastic equals patriotism. America loves plastic. It's plastics. American is apple pie. Yum, 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 plastics. Let's not forget, just kind of for this whole conversation, this whole webinar, that the plastics industry and the oil and gas industry they're the same. It's the same process, the same input, it's just a different kind of product. And there are lots of good documentaries about this. I'll share some in the follow-up email. But basically, as these industries are kind of losing their grasp in areas like transportation and energy production, we're seeing them ramp up plastic production. And that's not in response to supply and demand. When you go to a store and you're just trying to buy zucchini and the only option is it's wrapped in a saran wrap on a styrofoam tray, that's not something that we ask for as consumers. That's just ramped up production regardless of our behavior as consumers. And I will talk more just about this, that of course, voting with your dollar is still legitimate. Of course, we as consumers still have power, but the point is that we're not the ones who caused this production to skyrocket the way it has since the end of World War II. So fast forwarding to the 70s, when activists and environmentalists started demanding responsibility specifically from these packagers, the industry pivoted to pushing these alternative narratives. And actually, sorry, I will back up just for a second. Another point that I just like to give up and that I like to bring up, and again, which is in the NPR story as well, is that in the mid 60s, there was a like a plastics industry conference. And the keynote speaker was this man named Lloyd Stouffer, and he was the editor for Modern Packaging magazine. And he's addressing this group of packaging industry people, and he's saying, we need to be designing for the trash can. Like we need to not even, that was a quote, and now this is me. We need to be not even giving them the choice to save it. Like we need to design stuff that can only go in the trash can. It belongs in the trash can. And at this time, they're pushing these messages of, here's how you throw this away. Here's how it's cool. Here's how it's American. Here's how it's healthy. All of that stuff. So then a few years later, the same conference happens and Lloyd comes back and he addresses the crowd again. And this time he says, and again, this is a quote, he says, "Gentlemen, the happy day has arrived where nobody any longer considers the plastic package too good to throw away." So he's saying, we did it, fellas. Congrats. We not only made the crappiest product that we could, designed for the trash can, but then we taught them how to throw it away. We did it. And so in the 70s, when they were seeing the results of this, they were seeing litter everywhere, and they were seeing, packaging just piling up. They said, activists, environmentalists, community members said, hey, packagers, do you want to take care of this? What's the deal? Like, what's the plan for all of this production that you've done in the past few decades? And that's when the industry pivoted to these messages, which, if the Lloyd Stouffer example wasn't a good enough example of that this was intentional, that they did this knowingly, this is a pretty good clue as well. They pivoted to this motto: people cause pollution, people can stop it, and that the solution is recycling. So this is what I like to call deny, distract, deregulate. So they're saying, no, this is not our fault at all. This is actually your fault. And that's a distraction, right? They're saying if you each individually try to examine this as your individual problem, and it's up to you as individuals to fix it, then they know that it's not going to come back to them. And we're not going to get to the real root of the issue, which has to involve them as producers. And then deregulate. Again, the plastics industry has the, kind of lobbying and financial power that the oil and gas industry has. It's, again, the same resources. And so an example of deregulation here strategically is something like a plastics preemption. So that existed in the state of Colorado as well as many other states currently, and in Colorado until very recently, which says communities themselves cannot regulate plastics. You can do it at the state level or not at all. And of course, that was just limiting the regulation of plastic. That was very intentional. And so let's talk about people cause pollution, people can stop it. Again, I always come back to this because it shook me to my core when I found out this, the real kind of narrative behind this. So on the left here, you can see this ad put out by Keep America Beautiful. And if you were around in the 70s, you probably remember this. It was incredibly impactful. And in my environmental studies undergraduate classes, we would talk about this, not in the way that I'm about to, but as a very successful environmental behavior change campaign. So in the right, you can see again, the tagline: people start pollution, people can stop it. And I would first like to say, again, I say this all the time, but if you don't know, this actor was Italian American. He was in no way indigenous. He made a full career out of impersonating and appropriating indigenous identities. He went by this, made up indigenous name his entire career, although he, again, had no American Indian heritage. And again, this ad was very impactful in that it was saying, hey, all of this litter in this river, this is your fault, and you need to look inward and you need to figure out how to clean it up. And if we look at who put it out, Keep America Beautiful was made up of these industries, these corporations, these packagers. So to think, it's so crazy to me to think about these guys taking packaging that they made, putting it into a river for a commercial, like putting it everywhere for this commercial, hiring this Italian American man to shed some tears and make everyone feel, think that it was their fault, instead of, like that's a direct pivot. That's a direct deny, distract, deregulate. And we'll talk about why this ad was effective and why it was important in some ways, but not for the reasons that we might have thought. And there are hopeful aspects to this for sure, but it's just a good example of they did know, and they, for in many, many different ways, throughout many different decades, they've denied, distracted, deregulated. And before I go forward, are there people within the plastics and packaging industries who are doing the right thing? Of course. There are players everywhere who are, do not fall under the broad categories that I'm painting right now or the umbrellas that I'm putting over them. But, is producer responsibility and environmental stewardship the status quo or the priority of these corporations? No, nor certainly has it been for decades. The last one is just the most disturbing. I'm sorry. I'm obsessed with this one because it's so creepy. So again, they also started to push recycling at this point because it puts the onus on communities, on cities, on, states, on community members. And they knew that, pushing that as the solution wouldn't actually slow production, which is what they want. So again, recycling is important. It is one of the solutions, and it's not the one that's going to get us to the root of the solution. And they knew that. So we've been taught for generations that people are apathetic, they're wasteful, they're lazy, they're stupid. I hear all the time, like, oh, if only humans, if only we cared, or if only we weren't so, stupid that we can't just sort one thing from another. It's not that. It's that we've been taught that. We've also been taught that the problem is us as consumers and recyclers, and that plastics are, natural, safe, healthy, sustainable. Again, there are certainly healthy and, useful applications of plastics. But, this is just going to show that when there was resistance to this mass kind of production and introduction of plastics, that resistance was met with like, no, Americans, didn't you hear it? Plastics it's American as apple pie. Feed it to your son. Put your baby in this bag. It'll keep it fresh. And, that's something that's felt in current generations, absolutely. Okay, so those were our headlines. I really didn't want to leave us on those images. So let's talk about Plastic Free July a little bit. So yes, all of that is systemic. All of that is bigger than us as individual consumers. And we as individual consumers absolutely have power to fix this. Partly we as individuals have to just get involved and have to get conscious, and then we can collectively work on things. But also, as I said, you can vote with your dollar, and just your personal waste footprint does, of course, physically have a big environmental and social impact. And I think just like the more we can get curious, the more we can get into it, the more we can have fun and connect with others over this sort of thing, I think the better activists we are all, and environmental stewards we all become. So as I said, this is a guide, the How to Quit Plastics guide we created a few years ago, and it's a really comprehensive little packet. It's a PDF. Again, I'll send it out. You can print it out if you want to like write through it, and it really just walks you through the things that I'm about to talk about and more. So again, you can engage as much or as little as you want with this tool, but it is yours if you want it, and it can be found on our website whenever. So the first kind of step to, examining your own plastic consumption and use and moving toward reducing that impact is a self-audit. Before we work toward a goal, we need to know what we're starting from. And because of all of the things that we've talked about, as consumers, it can all kind of blend together. Like we just see packaging everywhere we go. And because it's constantly moving through our households, it's hard to keep track of like what it even is and how much. And so I think a self-audit is a great way to do this. I try to do this once a year, if not, like every time something changes, like every semester, or if you move or you have a new, house mate or something like that, new pet. And so this can be, again, it can be little, it can be big, it can be your entire house. It can just be like, I'm just going to start with my kitchen waste bin. Again, the workbook will talk you through it, but basically, it's just looking at like, what do I buy in packaging? What could I maybe reduce? What could I maybe replace? How much is it? Is it plastic? Do I need it? And if you need it, of course, leave it alone. There are so many things that we can do societally and individually. I think we get caught up in like, oh, my medicine gets, shipped to me in bottles or a cooler. And, societally, we're like, I'm afraid of going plastic free because we need plastics for things like hospitals. Of course, we need plastics for some things, and you should never, choose poor health over something like that. But again, we care about plastics because of community health and because of individual health. And so there's so many ways that we can reduce plastic before we start talking about any of these kind of more necessary plastics. The next thing is starting to reduce that plastic use, starting to swap out some plastics for reusable specifically. And so again, this is an easy place to fall into a consumer trap, where people think, oh, zero waste kit, that sounds expensive. Like we see a lot of this kind of privileged approach to, or inaccessible approach to zero waste living, where, we see like bamboo cutlery in like a little travel thing. And if you use that, great. But if you don't have access or that's expensive, we all have forks and spoons and knives in our house. You can wrap them in a napkin or a piece of cloth from your house and just bring it out. We have like these little boxes that we as society like to think about, like this belongs inside our house and this is like the travel version. But there's no real reason for that. Like if you don't want an expensive travel mug, a jar with a lid works great. That's what I've been doing every time I go get my tea. There's a lot of ways to not buy anything. And again, that's the point here, right? And then we get to some guidance around zero waste swaps and shopping. So the guide goes into a lot of things about like, okay, if this is what you were finding in your trash can, like you found a bunch of, you're using a bunch of like toothpaste tubes that are plastic and unrecyclable. Here are some swaps. Like there's a bunch of zero waste options for toothpaste, for example. There's also some guidance around zero waste shopping. So at the beginning of this, I was talking about how the co-op right next door, they have this great bulk section. And so we just go in with our jars, we write we weigh the jar, we write it on the top, we scoop the dry goods or whatever it is into the jar, and then just keep doing that. It's plastic free. I get to do the amount that I want, so it reduces food waste. It's cheaper. It's awesome. If you don't have access to something like that, no worries. There's so many other ways still. Like, again, we're often faced with no choice around these things, but a lot of times if you reach for like the plastic spinach big tub or like kale or whatever, there's usually like a bare produce option, like where you just grab the bunch of kale by itself, or farmers markets, or in Boulder and Denver, there's a bunch of different zero waste stores. In Boulder, actually, Boulder and Denver both have a nude food store, for example, where the whole point is zero waste shopping. Again, if you don't have access to those things, this guide just kind of helps you meet the challenge wherever you are. And the point here, again, is just to get curious rather than guilty or, feel like you're not doing enough, because the point of this whole conversation has been, it's not your fault. It's not. We're not going to, we don't have access to a completely zero waste system until we build one collectively that works for us all. And so if you're not able to meet zero waste, you're not able to meet plastic free, yeah, join the club. Like none of us can, because we've been put into this system that we have to constantly fight against in order to be plastic free, in order to be zero waste. But I think this is a really great exercise just in terms of, starting with yourself and building this conscious consumerism. We did a webinar a few months ago just on consumerism and how to kind of use psychological tools on yourself to avoid a lot of these consumerism like tricks and pitfalls and things like that. So I will send that out in the follow-up email as well. So just some takeaways. Again, this is one that I've just been like screaming from the rooftops in the past year because I just feel like I get it so often. I just like see people who are so burdened with this issue because it's so heavy. It is really emotionally hard to carry. And I talk to people who are like, ah, if only people didn't suck. Like if only we didn't, if only we weren't so apathetic, if only we cared. No, not only are we not apathetic, not only are we smart and resourceful, but we know we can live outside of the single use system because we did forever. For the existence of humankind before all of this kind of top down stuff happened, we were doing it. If you talk to, if you're lucky enough to talk to an elder about things like this, they can probably tell you, like, yeah, show them any package, like plastic package. They can talk to you about what it looked like before plastic packaging existed. We don't even have to like invent new crazy things. We can literally just visit our own history. And it wasn't that long ago. It's in living memory. And that's really hopeful to me. Um, okay, I'm gonna go to the second to last bullet because it's just, I don't know why I didn't put them together on the slide. But the main thing, like my main takeaway from the whole Keep America Beautiful story is that my main takeaway is hope. Because if that whole thing was manipulating our willingness and our passion for protecting each other and the environment, it wouldn't have worked if we were apathetic. It wouldn't have worked if we didn't care about ourselves, each other, and we didn't care about the environment. And we didn't want to steward what's around us. If the crying Indian commercial, again, that's just the title, was put out to an apathetic and stupid and lazy and wasteful audience, we would have just been like, okay, like you clean it up then. But what happened instead was one of the most drastic behavior change campaigns ever. What happened instead was that litter became like almost overnight a much smaller problem. And again, this is used still in modern times as an example of an incredibly effective behavior change campaign because it was, because it was playing on taking advantage of and leveraging our willingness to step up, take responsibility, and clean up the environment, take care of ourselves, and take care of each other. We cared about environmental justice. We saw that ad and we cried too. I've been talking specifically to people who were around in the 70s and saw this ad, and everyone says the same thing. They were like, I cried when I saw that ad. I went outside, I picked up all the litter. And to this day, if you're like walking on the sidewalk behind someone and you see them like throw a candy wrapper over your shoulder, you're like, hey, like it's a big no-no. And it's so crazy that we have been trained to say, like, don't litter, that's wrong, instead of being like, wait, who made this? Why is this even here? And that's the whole point of deny, distract, deregulate, right? Like, we have been willing, we said, okay, if this is my fault, then yes, I will take that on. I will do whatever it takes to clean this up. And that's exactly the passion, that's exactly the responsibility, that's exactly the stewardship and care for each other that is going to get us to these real solutions. If we can just leverage that in the way that actually gets to the root of it, if we can just all collectively do that together in a way that empowers us all, we've got it made. And so I think, I really want you to come away with a feeling of power and hope because I really do feel that in all of my conversations with people about this. So yes, this is systemic, and in order to succeed, we must approach it as such, as well as taking responsibility as individuals. We need to keep recycling like the plastic that you end up with. Like again, don't take these headlines to mean just throw all your plastics away. Again, speaking for Boulder County, if you're giving us bottles, tubs, jugs, jars, takeout containers, these recyclable plastics, again, there's environmental benefits for sure to recycling those things. And this is, again, a really kind of widely used metaphor here, and I'm sure you've heard it, but forgive me, I'll go through it again. If you were to walk into your house and all of the taps in your house were on full force, your pets were swimming around, you wouldn't get bogged down in figuring out how you were going to bail it out the window while that was happening. The very first thing you would do is turn off all the taps, and then you'd be like, okay, how do we deal with this water? And that's what we need to do with plastics. We do need to figure out what we're going to do with all this plastic, but first we need to stop the production of all of this useless stuff that, again, is forever. Again, individual and lots of equitable collective action is the path forward. Lots of folks can't even take individual action because they simply don't have the infrastructure for it. So those of us that do have access to any zero waste solutions, let's use them, let's amplify them, and let's work to collectively make them accessible to everybody. I'm not sure if Lex is on, but Lex, again, is my the person taking on my previous role. She's awesome. And she gave me this slide about what you can be doing right now. If you're not already an Eco Leader volunteer, I would highly recommend it. It's great stuff. You can sign up there. Again, I'll send this stuff out in the follow-up email. And a current way that you can take action is we're working on landfill regulations because, of course, landfills have huge impacts on human health, on social equity, on all of that stuff, environmental health. And you can submit comments as community members on those updated landfill regulations right now. And again, I'll send this out in the follow-up email. And that's my planned content for you today. I have the website for our organization. This is just like the general email. If you want to email Lex about getting engaged, that's her email. And then mine is just if you have follow-ups for this webinar or just want to chat about any of this. With that, I will stop sharing and jump into Q&A. Okay, this is Junebug. She's going to be helping me answer the questions. Okay, how can we get involved with EcoCycle? Do you have to live in Colorado? Great question. So yeah, the previous slide is mostly for Colorado residents, but EcoCycle has a lot of ways that you can kind of take our solutions and implement them in your own community. If there's things you have in mind, I would be really happy to talk you through them. I'm sure Lex would be happy to talk to you as well. In terms of volunteering with us, being in state is helpful, but if you want to get involved and you want to reach out, we would love to talk about how we can work together with you. Yeah, Molly says that crying Indian commercial had a tremendous impact on making me who I am today. And again, I've heard that from so many people, and that's awesome. Like, even though it was made by someone who was trying to manipulate your, your empathy and your stewardship, like it worked because we cared. And we can look back at that ad campaign and learn a lot. And if I've sullied it for you, and this was a huge again origin story for you, then don't let this story make you feel any differently about yourself as an environmentalist or as an activist or a steward. Just like the more we know, the more we can again leverage that care in even more impactful and beneficial ways. Yes, it is. I mean, I wasn't alive when it came out, but the first time I saw it, I also cried and was also impacted. Maybe everyone on this webinar knows this, but this is our first webinar on this topic, and we don't fully understand what plastics are recyclable or what plastic items are most problematic in the recycling sorting facilities. Thank you for asking this question. No, it is not at all assumed that you would know. And even people who've been around this conversation forever, it's changing all the time because of this, what we're talking about. There's this disconnect between producers and recycling, and there's a million different types of plastic coming out all the time. So that is not a silly question in any way. And I do have I do have a slide that I will show you let's talk about what's recyclable. Let me share my screen again. Okay. Oh, oh. Let's try this one. Okay. So once again, I am speaking for EcoCycle for Boulder County. So if you live in Boulder County, these are your guidelines. And I will say that another really exciting piece of legislation that was passed, again, I'm not going to credit it to, the Chinese national sword, but again, it was part of these last 7-ish years of like huge legislative progress. One of the outcomes of that was the producer responsibility bill that was passed recently in the state of Colorado, and there's in several other states. And part of that in Colorado means that rather than having different guidelines everywhere you go, like different ones in Boulder and Denver and Colorado Springs and Golden and Niwot, we're going to have one set of statewide guidelines. So what I'm talking about right now is Boulder County, but it still will give you a pretty good idea of what's recyclable plastic wise anywhere. And just know that Colorado is working toward this unified universal set of guidelines. Excuse me. So with plastics, the first thing to know is that the recycling symbol it's not meaningful. It's not regulated, and it doesn't know where you are. It doesn't know whether that thing is recyclable where you are. And often, again, it's just a greenwashing tactic that doesn't mean anything at all. So rather than trying to look at the bottom for the recycling symbol or try to look for the number, I just want you to look at what is the thing you're holding. If it's a bottle, tub, jug, or jar, odds are pretty good that it's a recyclable plastic. Bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars just tend to be made from a resin. So just one of the categories, just one of the different chemical makeups of plastic. It tends to be made of one of the resins that are less toxic, more durable, more recyclable, but they're also in a shape and size and form that we can collect, we can sort, and we can sell. So I always embarrass people when I do like in-person ones where I make them repeat bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, because it will stick once you say it about 3 times. So at home, there's no one to judge you. Just say out loud with me: bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. Bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. Bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars are kind of the bread and butter of plastic recycling. And again, it will vary a bit from place to place, but these are essentially the ones that are like, yeah, it's durable. You can kind of knock on it. It's not going to just like crumple. It's not going to fall apart into a million pieces if it goes through a recycling center. And it's not something weird like polystyrene usually. In Boulder County, and again, in most places that accept plastics in the recycling, you can keep the lid or the cap on. Even if it looks like it's made of 2 different types of plastic, like with this peanut butter jar, it looks like this, yellow guy is a different plastic than this see-through guy. But if it's plastic on plastic, they can go through together as long as the container itself is empty. So, check your guidelines wherever you go, wherever you live. But bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars are a pretty good starting place for recycling plastic. And things like the labels, the stickers are usually not a problem. Again, look at your own guidelines, but they're not a problem in Boulder County. They're usually not a problem for plastics recyclers. And in Boulder County, we also more recently added plastic clamshells, lids, and takeout containers. So like a little berry container, and like that salad container we talked about earlier, this clamshell takeout container, this one maybe had some soup in it, and tub lids too. So in the past, like I talked about, plastic requires infrastructure. It requires expensive equipment and investments to actually sort and be able to recycle them. And so Boulder County several years ago got a very exciting upgrade in the form of optical sorters, which are again pretty common in recycling centers because we kind of have to sort these plastics. In the past, a lot of recyclers, including Boulder County, were trying to do a lot of this just with our hands, like just bottle, tub, jug, jar. And even in that system, there's variance of the resin number within those shapes. So it's very hard to sort plastics, and it's very cool that we have these optical sorters, which are lasers that shoot them around. If you haven't been to the Boulder County Recycling Center, I highly recommend. I'm obsessed with the lasers. I can't believe they work, but they do. And that is one of the reasons that we were able to upgrade and take things like a tub lid and these flat little berry containers. In the past, it's like whizzing by on a conveyor belt. And you are wearing big gloves to protect you from the weird stuff people put in the recycling. And in the past, you just couldn't grab something like a tub lid. You just could not physically do it. Now that we have these optical sorters, we're able to take some more of this stuff. So again, this might vary more from place to place, but bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars are still going to be kind of the bread and butter with plastics. But your recycling program might not even have plastics recycling. It depends. So what plastic items are the most problematic? Great question. The first one I would say is plastic bags. Plastic bags, along with food and liquid, are the #1 contaminant in our recycling facility, but also basically any recycling facility that you find. So in a recycling center, again, it's like, oh, it's this crazy Rube Goldberg machine of like conveyor belts and like rotating gears and wheels, and stuff climbs up and it gets sorted and gets like shot around by air and magnets and hands. And in these rotating gears and wheels, plastic bags just do an exceptional job of jamming it up. It just jams up the equipment. And so we have to just like shut down everything and climb in and cut out all the plastic bags a lot, very frequently. And again, any recycling center does. And so plastic bags are recyclable in that they have a market. They have someone who, if you get them to this market, will turn it into something new. It's usually like composite decking, like Trex decking. But in the recycling center, there's an infrastructural barrier, which is what I just described. We can't sort it with all the equipment that we use to sort the other stuff. And so in order to recycle a plastic bag, we just have to bring it to a separate collection. So it's called a hard to recycle plastic. So you can bring it to the Charm, you can bring it to like whatever your local plastic bag collection is. There's probably one at a local grocery store, your city might have one. And I would say like beyond plastic bags, I'm not sure even the ranking of the different plastic contaminants. But certainly, again, polystyrene is a big one. Polystyrene, there are some options for like block foam, like when you get a TV and there's like that styrofoam that's holding it in and it falls apart in little balls and gets on your clothes. There are options for that. For example, at the Charm, we can take it. But like something like you'd get a hamburger in a squeaky clamshell that's made of foam, that kind of thing is really, really hard to recycle. It's really considered a contaminant to most recyclers. Certainly, it's really hard to deal with. It's very toxic. It's very cheap is the problem. So I would say plastic bags, polystyrene, and then just like any of the little wrappers. Like there's so many little pouches and wrappers and things that like if you were to just crunch it, like it would just crunch up, it would just ball up. It's not durable. You can't knock on it. You can't kind of hold it firmly. Anything that just scrunches immediately, it's a great indicator that plastic is not recyclable. Just these like really low grade plastics are the other ones that are really problematic and cause a lot of contamination. But again, like anything that doesn't fall under the yeses, we say when in doubt, throw it out. We also say when in doubt, give us a shout. You can always call our hotline. You can email our EcoCycle email that I put in the last slide and which I'll send out again. We're here for you. But yeah, bottles, tubs, jugs, jars, containers, tub lids. Anything else, give us a call or consider it contamination. Great question, Stephanie. Thank you. Okay, what about companies that will take plastics that can't go in the collected recycling bins? Can you recommend some that are reasonably priced and also not too complicated to use? I've heard about TerraCycle, but are there others? That one seems very expensive. Great question, JW. So as a nonprofit, we're not allowed to promote specific brands or companies. But I can talk you through kind of how to figure this out, and I can send some resources as well in the follow-up. So like I said, just like plastic bags, yeah, this is like, we're talking hard to recycle. This is stuff that like either doesn't, it takes additional processing or additional money, or there's like something specific about the market. It can't go through our facilities. There's a lot of things that could make something hard to recycle. And because of kind of the like, there's a lot of lack of transparency, right? In the whole process and the whole recycling conversation, it gets very confusing to know, again, are you doing something real or like what's happening to the plastics that I genuinely am trying to do something correct with? So TerraCycle, again, I can send out some resources. They have had some legal issues with their transparency. So they've just had some instances of like people saying, hey, what are you doing when you say you take cigarette butts? Like, how are those getting recycled? I do think that they have some, again, I'm not the expert on TerraCycle. I don't represent them. To my knowledge, they have some genuine brand partnerships where essentially they're creating individual producer responsibility, where they're saying, okay, like this toothpaste brand or whatever, if we collect all of your toothpastes and we give them back to you, will you recycle them? And so basically they're creating their own market through charging you, which, yeah, it can be expensive. There are, so like in Colorado, there's Ridwell, like the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. There are some options that I can share to the best of my knowledge. But really, I think the bottom line here is like, there's a lot of plastic that just simply doesn't have a real solution. Like some of the stuff maybe is getting melted into like a park bench or like playground equipment or something like that. And it's, it's not that the bottle needs to, it's not that the plastic needs to be like recycled back into what it was like when we talk about other recyclable materials. It's more like it's creating something that still has to go to the landfill at the end of its life. But great to make a park bench out of recycled stuff rather than virgin plastic. So just like learning how to get to the bottom of it with whatever company you're looking at, I think is great. And again, having this kind of knowledge of how, does it involve the producer? Who's getting paid to do it? What are you doing with the money that I'm giving you? And yeah, like I said, this is a systemic issue where like in order to do kind of the right thing, the things that you're trying to do to lessen your impact is often expensive because we're in this system that doesn't incentivize us to do those things. It doesn't set us up for success. So again, I'm sorry I don't have a more satisfying answer for this. But if you like, feel free to, if you're checking out a specific company, feel free to send it to me and I can kind of like we can work together on figuring out the validity and maybe figuring out some alternatives. And in the workbook also, like that's kind of the point is like, if there's a bunch of plastics that you're being left with that you have nothing, you've no avenue for, like here are some alternatives to consider to that product itself, to that package itself. Okay, Marty. Hi, Marty Hirsch. Is anyone making ads today to push people in a more positive direction? I can't imagine that the answer is no. I have certainly seen some marketing things that are genuine, that are real. And I think, again, like collectively, we're kind of getting we're getting closer to the point. We're getting closer to the truth. Again, like I feel like I've just heard a lot of news stories and like, again, that NPR story that I'll send out, just that really does like cut to the truth of it. It definitely, we are still seeing modern versions of that kind of, post World War II stuff that I took us through. Like, there was like an ad in the last, I don't know when the last time I saw the Super Bowl was, but like several years ago, there was like a big plastics recycling ad that I got a lot of calls about. It's just being masked in different and modern ways. And yeah, it's hard to tell the difference. But I think, again, like more than ever, there's more people doing the right thing. There's producers, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, who are now being called to the table and having to engage with the solution. I think more stuff is coming to the surface. I think more stuff is visible, but that just means that we're getting closer to those solutions. You know, the closer to the surface it is, the closer we are to all understanding what's going on. If anyone has examples of positive ads, please send them and I'll send them out to the group. I feel like I haven't even seen ads in a while. But thanks for coming, Marty. I know you know a lot about this stuff. How to reduce and what has been a successful swap for paper coffee cup lined with plastic coating and has a plastic top? Is it true we are drinking microplastics contaminating hot liquid in the end? I would like to see studies about how many types of plastic react to heat. Yes, I completely agree, Dimitri, that the health aspects can be a convincing deterrent. I, again, am not an expert on the health. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. But there are certainly some very compelling things that are coming out about plastic and its health impacts. Again, like not only just microplastics being found in, you know, different organs of our bodies. And like one of the most recent ones that I've been getting emails about is that we have the equivalent of a plastic spoon in our brain. That's concerning for sure, just to have that in our bodies. But there's also definitely stuff about the heat reactive qualities of plastics. And I wouldn't even, so in terms of resins, the ones that we know are more unhealthy in the scheme of just plastic resins are 3, 6, and 7. 3s, 6s, and 7s have all been proven, well, heavily shown, I don't want to say proven in any scientific context, but heavily shown to have negative health impacts within a human lifespan, specifically when heated up, but really just like contact in general. But any plastic, like at the end of the day, plastic is petroleum. Like it just is fossil fuels. And when heated, it's, you know, like I think when I see somebody putting hot coffee in like a styrofoam cup, I'm like, oh, that looks really scary to me. And again, I'm not a doctor, but just, yeah, the more we can maybe educate ourselves on the health impacts, the better. And I think, like you said, Dimitri, it's a great gateway for people who maybe don't even identify as environmentalists. They're not aware of or maybe concerned with as much the environmental impacts, but the health impacts, yeah, like we all want the same thing. We all want a healthy environment. We all want healthy bodies. We all want healthy children. Plastics are doing a lot of work in all of those spheres. So how to reduce specifically, so yeah, a paper coffee cup, great news. This is one of the absolute easiest ones that you can reduce. Like if you just want to start with just replacing that, like you've made a huge difference. What I do, again, like I said, I literally just have a jar with a cap that I trust and I throw it in my bag. Sometimes I have a little like koozie. I have friends that like crochet little things that, you know, will keep your hand from burning if you have something hot in the jar. There's, you can go, another thing that I do, if this doesn't gross you out, it doesn't for me, but I'll go thrift shopping for reusable, like whether it's a big jar or like a nice stainless steel reusable mugs, if you just give it like a good wash. Again, it doesn't have to break the bank, even if it's a nice one. Like I promise there are those at thrift stores. If you want to like invest and you want to buy a new stainless steel, you know, or glass or whatever, reusable coffee cup, like that's totally your decision. What I would recommend is having it like keeping one like that in a place where you would grab as you're walking out the door, and then keeping another like either in a purse or a bag or the car, like where you maybe weren't planning on getting coffee. I think that just is really helpful, whether it comes to a coffee cup or a tote bag or oh, another huge one is takeout containers. Like when you go to a restaurant and you have to ask for them to box something up, instead, you can just skip that. You can just take a container. Like I know you have Tupperware. I know you have containers at your house. You can just bring it with you to the restaurant. And then when you're done eating what you're eating, just scrape it into the container and you're done. You just skip the takeout container altogether. There's no health code stuff because that food is already yours. Like you you've already eaten from that. So you can just throw it in a container. And so the more you can kind of just keep, again, like this, we go through this in the workbook of like, here's some alternatives, but also here are some like tips on just like where to keep them and how to strategically have those ready. Marty says, I met Lex and she is delightful. I agree. And I miss you, Marty, and I'm around. My email is active. Hit me up anytime. Okay. Maxwell says, can you talk a little bit about the incineration news? Seems like one way to make plastics not forever, but I know it has likely more drawbacks than benefits. Is that right? Ooh, juicy question. So I, again, am not an expert on incineration. There are certainly people who are. My policy colleagues can talk a lot more about this, but here is my very simplified answer to this. Remember when I was talking about if you came home and all of the taps were turned on and Junebug was swimming around with her little paws? The first thing you would do is turn off the tap. Anyone would do that. That is the logical solution to that problem. At that point, you would start to talk about how do we deal with the water that's already in our house. And that's how I view kind of there's so many different versions and so many different names for this. So incineration can literally mean burning plastics. It can also mean like a more technologically complicated kind of molecular level dismantling and remit. Like there's a bunch of different versions of this waste to energy solution when it comes to plastics. Some of those are far more legitimate than others. However, we're having these conversations before we have turned off the tap, and that is part of the deny, distract, deregulate issue. That's part of that strategy. So in Colorado, we just had a whole legislative tussle about this, where we said, I don't think we should be able to have plastic incineration waste to energy facilities in the state of Colorado, certainly not subsidized by the government. And it made it to the governor's desk, at which point it was vetoed. And I can send out more information about why that happened, but it's deny, distract, deregulate. It's, the more we talk about like, the more we kind of infight about things like waste to energy and recycling and all of this stuff that is the equivalent of taking a bucket and throwing stuff out the window before we turn off the tap, the more we get further away from just turning off the tap. So we need to, okay, first turn off the tap, then yes, we should talk about how to deal with the plastics, but it's to do that and not be doing the former is not the way. We have to do them together. The other thing that I will say about some incineration, and again, many different versions of this, but the other thing I will say about incineration facilities is that they are expensive. That's expensive equipment. That's expensive facilities. And so once you invest in those facilities, you have to feed the beast, right? Like there's no incentive then to turn off the tap because once you've built it, then it's like, okay, just keep making all the single-use plastics you want because we'll just be burning it. Like we can be made, there's better ways for us to make energy, and we can talk about that, but we need to turn off the tap first. We need to be incentivizing those useless single-use linear things to not exist in the first place, and then we can all talk about, okay, we have a pile of plastics here, what are we going to do with it? So again, that's my simplified, and again, just speaking from my perspective on that. If other people have strong thoughts about or hopes about incineration, again, such a such a wide umbrella. But I just really want to, like, regardless of what that looks like, great, first, let's turn off the tap. And often it's not great. Often it's burning plastics, again, at the expense of low-income communities, of communities of color, of other countries. So complicated issue, but not so complicated in that let's turn off the tap first. Okay. I always have questions about what plastics I can put in my bin beyond what is on the EcoCycle posters. It's not just a matter of is this recyclable, but does EcoCycle recycle this? Amen, Christine. So I hope that I answered this a little bit, at least with my earlier slide. But the good thing about EcoCycle is that we are here for you. You can call, again, I'll send out all our contact info. You can call our number, you can email our email address, you can take a picture. My phone is all the time blowing up with just pictures of people's hands like holding a piece of trash. And we're happy to help you with that. The other thing is we have an app, which you can download on your phone or wherever you get apps. Or you can just do it through our website. It's called the EcoCycle A to Z app. And you can just like, if you have something that you're like, this isn't on the guidelines, isn't on the poster, you can just type it in and we'll give you like, do we recycle it? But also like, are there other things to do with it? Is there a take back? Is there a repair? Like whatever we have about that item, we'll give it to you. But again, like new packaging is coming out all the time, and certainly not all of the stuff is on the guidelines. If it's not and you don't have access to this line, just like assume it's contamination. It probably is. But if you give us a call, if you send us an email, send us a picture, hit us up on the app, we are happy to talk you through it because yeah, we shouldn't, that's another thing. Like we shouldn't all need a master's in plastics to like know just how to steward our own recycling bins. And again, we're really hopeful about the progress we've made with producer responsibility because that will address a lot of the issues that I mentioned about like greenwashing and mislabeling and just throwing the recycling symbol on everything. Like this will mean that producers are having conversations with us about how to not purposefully confuse you all the time. I teach at the University of Denver. Could you come to my class as a guest speaker? Thank you so much. I will maybe send me an email because I'm not in state and Lex would probably love to do it. I don't want to volunteer her, but we can, yes, we would love to talk. Please just reply to the follow-up email that I sent. Okay. Are plant-based plastics a myth? Ooh, good one. Since these biodegradable plastics can be recycled, do they potentially have a worse environmental impact than recyclable plastics? Great question. So yeah, this is also an example of like runaway greenwashing in the past. As people started to opt for compostable packaging, a bunch of other packagers were like, oh, if I just throw the word biodegradable on there, then people will buy it, even if it's petroleum-based plastic and it's not, it's not compostable. So biodegradable previously, well, usually still is an unregulated term. Biodegradable just means like it'll break down into smaller pieces over time, which yeah, like anything will. In the state of Colorado, we recently passed a law called the Truth in Compostables Labeling Act that says, guess what? You can't just slap that on whatever you want. You either have to be certified, your thing has to be certified compostable, or you can't put a stupid green leaf or photodegradable or whatever you want on there. It has to be compostable or not. If it is genuinely a plant-based plastic, yeah, this is another opportunity for us to like have more conversations about the actual issue. If you live in the Front Range, you've probably received news about changing compost. You probably felt the impacts of changing compost regulation or changing compost guidelines. And so this is a whole separate conversation. But again, this is a good opportunity for us, even if those things are genuinely compostable, they might not be right now for your local facility. But regardless, it's a good opportunity for us to be like, wait, this is still a single-use item, right? So in some ways, it is a great way to capture food waste and keep it from going to the landfill where it emits methane, and instead diverting it to the compost. In some ways, if you're at an event and there's a bunch of food that people are dealing with and eating and getting rid of, if that food is on stuff that goes in the same bin as the food, then that's a great way to make sure that more food waste is diverted into the compost from the landfill. In other ways, these plant-based plastics, it's usually corn. There's a bunch of other things we can make it out of, but it's often corn. They're still single-use items, right? And in a lot of ways, we've kind of pivoted to like, well, let's not actually like change the single-use linear model. Let's just make the plastic less bad. So again, I would encourage us to really look upstream and really be like, yes, this is compostable, but is there some way that I could make it not single use in general? Because even if that plant-based plastic is going to the compost, great. That's great that it's going to the compost. But it also took a lot of resources to make it in the first place. It's not made of petroleum, and in that way, you're divesting from petroleum, but there's certainly petroleum inputs into that system. There's monocropping and there's pesticides, like there's things that are happening that are still more impactful than just a reusable. And if it's not going to the compost, great that it won't end up as microplastics. Like if it, along with its plastic peers, heads to, God forbid, the ocean or a landfill or what, it won't in the same way cause microplastics. It will not contribute to the microplastics issue. But it's still a single-use item, and there's still better things we can do for it. We can still better things we can do in place of that product in most cases. Again, like in some cases, like events, if you truly can't have a reusable option, maybe, and you have a facility that takes them, maybe that's the best option. If you only, as a consumer, if you only have the option of single-use petroleum plastic and single-use plant-based plastic, I would opt for plant-based plastic personally, because again, you're engaging less with fossil fuels upstream and you're causing fewer microplastics downstream. Is it the perfect replacement? In my opinion, no. Again, this stuff is so nuanced. It's so hard to know, you guys. And that's why we're here. Okay, wow, there's so many more. I was like, there's no way we'll go to 7:30. There's so many more questions. Thank you so much to everyone who came and to submitted questions. I will go ahead and download this Q&A box, and all of the questions that I didn't answer, I will type up the answers to, and I will send it out in the follow-up email. So I'm so sorry if I didn't get a chance to answer your question. But yeah, keep an eye out for the follow-up email. I usually try to do it by the next day, but I might do it Monday since the weekend is coming. But again, thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for your role in EcoCycle's existence and your role in this movement. And yeah, we love you. EcoCycle couldn't do it without you. And keep an eye out for my follow-up email. Yeah, I will let you go. Have a wonderful Thursday evening. Thank you all so much. The little hearts that are coming up is so nice. Again, sorry about the chat feature. We'll fix it one of these days, and keep an eye out for my follow-up, and please reply with anything at that point or even before. Okay, so much love to you all, so much gratitude, and have a lovely evening. I will talk to you all soon.